Hello, I'm Miss Jessie, and today I'm about to reveal a truth my son never saw coming. At a family barbecue, Tyrone mocked me, humiliated me in front of everyone. But what he didn't expect was for me to stand up and declare, I own this house, not you. You think you know betrayal? This isn't just about the house. It's about years of sacrifice, being silenced and stolen dignity. They thought they could break me, but this is just the beginning. What happens next will leave you speechless. The sun was setting behind the house as I stood in the backyard, the smell of sizzling burgers and hot dogs filling the air. The familiar chatter of my family echoed around me, the laughter and noise of another family barbecue. Every year we gathered here to celebrate birthdays, holidays, and sometimes just because. The backyard was my sanctuary, my space where I'd spent years making sure everything was perfect, from the perfectly cut grass to the meticulously arranged picnic tables. It was a place where I could hold my head high, but now it felt different. I had raised my children here, worked tirelessly to provide for them. And yet, the older they got, the more I felt invisible. It wasn't that they didn't love me, oh no. They did, but they didn't see me. Not really. My sacrifices, my hard work were taken for granted. I was the matriarch of the family, but my role had slowly morphed into one of silence. No one appreciated the effort it took to hold this family together. The constant weight of responsibility seemed to have slipped from their shoulders and landed squarely on mine. As I walked to the grill to check on the burgers, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I could feel the tension in the air, the slight undercurrent of discomfort that no one was willing to address. I'd spent so many years smoothing things over, being the quiet one, the one who took on everyone's burdens. But that didn't stop the ache in my chest. How long had it been since I felt truly valued? How long had I been the one who was always giving, always sacrificing, with nothing in return? My son, Tyrone, was leaning against the fence, laughing with the younger cousins. I noticed the way his gaze flicked over to me, just for a moment. A slight smirk tugged at his lips. It was always like this. He had been mocking me for years, always questioning my choices, my decisions, my authority. But today, it felt different. Today, something in me snapped. Mom, you going to stand there all day, or you going to actually serve us something? Tyrone's voice broke through the murmurs of the crowd, loud and cutting. He was clearly joking, but there was no mistaking the edge in his tone. My heart clenched in my chest. It wasn't the first time he had made a joke at my expense, but this time it stung more than usual. The laughter from the younger ones, his cousins, followed shortly after. They didn't see the cruelty behind his words. They didn't see how many years I had spent raising them, working 2 jobs, making sure their bellies were full and their clothes were clean. But Tyrone? He saw none of that. All he saw was someone to belittle, someone to make fun of, someone who would always be there to pick up the pieces when things went wrong. I wanted to yell, to tell him how much his words hurt, but I didn't. I couldn't. The silence in me grew louder than my anger. If I said something now, if I let him see how deeply he had wounded me, it would only cause more distance between us. And wasn't that what I had always tried to avoid? The thought of pushing him further away, of being the one who caused the rift in the family, held me back. So I said nothing. I forced a smile, the same tired smile I'd been wearing for years. "I'll get you your food, Tyrone. Don't worry." My voice didn't even shake. That's how well I had perfected the art of holding everything in. But inside, it felt like a dam was about to burst. The weight of all those years, the years of feeling unseen, unheard, was pressing down on me. I was tired. Tired of being the invisible mother, the quiet one who no one took seriously. I retreated into the kitchen for a moment, needing to gather myself. The laughter from outside faded as I stood there, my back pressed against the counter. I stared at the familiar kitchen, the one I had worked so hard to create, the one where I had spent countless hours making sure the house was a home for my children. But it didn't feel like a home anymore. Not when I was constantly overlooked, dismissed. Not when my sacrifices went unnoticed. I had spent so many years living for others. For my children, for my husband, for my family. But now, as I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, I realized something I had lost myself in the process. I had become a shadow in my own life, the one who always cleaned up, who always cooked, who always sacrificed. And for what? A thank you that never came? A smile that faded too quickly? No more. I was done. I walked back outside, my mind made up. It was time to stop being the quiet one. Time to stop letting them think they could walk all over me. I wasn't just some old woman in the corner. I was the one who had worked tirelessly to build this life, this family, and it was high time they knew it. When I stepped back into the backyard, the air was thick with tension. Tyrone had just made another joke at my expense, and I could feel the laughter dying in his throat when he saw me. I didn't wait for him to speak. "I'm the one who owns this house," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Not you. Not anyone else. This house, this family, everything you take for granted, it's mine. And I've had enough." The words hit harder than I expected. The yard fell silent, all eyes on me. Tyrone's face turned pale as he stumbled over his words. "What do you mean, Mom?" I pulled the deed from my pocket, the one I'd kept hidden for years. I'd kept it for this moment, when I could finally stop hiding behind my silence. I built this house with my hands, with my heart. I didn't do it so you could mock me. I did it for us. For you all. Tyrone opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The others stood there, shocked into silence. I saw the disbelief in their eyes, but there was something else there too, guilt. For once, I wasn't the one who had to apologize. For once, I wasn't the one who had to shrink. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the first time in a long time, I was standing tall, not just for my children, but for myself. I walked away from the barbecue then, leaving them to stew in the silence I'd created. I had said my piece. I had taken control, and no matter how they reacted, I knew this was the start of something new. The air was thick with an uncomfortable silence. The barbecue that had been full of laughter and light-hearted chatter only an hour ago now seemed like a distant memory. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air, the shock settling over my family like a thick fog. My children were all standing still, frozen, their eyes wide, some filled with confusion, others with disbelief. I watched Tyrone, his face turning red with a mixture of anger and frustration, his mouth slightly open but no words coming out. The last laugh had been stripped from him. I could feel the tension knotting in my stomach. Empowerment surged through me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but that empowerment was quickly tempered by the fear of what would come next. What would this mean for my family? For me? I had spoken the truth, exposed the foundation of our home for what it was. But now, as I looked around at my children, I couldn't help but feel a quiet uncertainty. There was a relief in my heart, yes. No longer was I the invisible woman in the corner, the one who had silently borne the weight of everything. But there was also a hollow feeling. What would they think of me now? Would they respect me, or would they turn away, as they had so many times before? I caught Tyrone's gaze again. His eyes were hard, his lips set in a thin line. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he turned sharply on his heel and stormed away. His frustration was palpable, and I knew he was trying to suppress the anger building inside of him. I didn't look away. I stood firm, my feet planted into the ground, watching him retreat. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. You've really lost it, huh? Tyrone's voice cut through the air as he turned back, his words dripping with sarcasm. You really think you can just change everything by pulling a stunt like that? You're acting like you've been the one running this show, but we all know better, Mom. His tone was biting, cruel. I didn't flinch. I stood there, still, letting his words wash over me like rain. They stung, but they didn't break me. You're overreacting, he said again, shaking his head as if he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. It's just a house, Mom. You didn't build anything alone. We all helped. The laughter from his cousins and the younger ones continued in the background as if they hadn't heard what just happened. They didn't get it. They didn't understand the years of sacrifice, the long nights, the endless work. They didn't understand what it took to raise them, to give them everything they needed, while I lost myself in the process. But Tyrone, he was supposed to understand. Or, at least, I thought he would. A sense of betrayal washed over me. It was like a cold wave hitting my chest, heavy and unrelenting. His words weren't just dismissive, they were cruel. All these years, I had put up with his disrespect, his refusal to acknowledge my worth. But today, something inside of me snapped. I didn't let it show. I stayed calm, my voice steady. I'm not overreacting, Tyrone. This house, this life, it's mine, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. He looked at me, a mix of confusion and anger in his eyes. I could feel the storm brewing in him, but I didn't back down. Not this time. The others were quiet, most unsure how to react. Some of my children avoided my gaze, too uncomfortable to speak. Others simply stared at me, waiting for the next move. The silence that followed was suffocating. My heart raced in my chest, but I didn't waver. I had done what I needed to do. Later that evening, after the laughter had died and the barbecue had come to an abrupt halt, Tyrone came back inside the house. The door creaked as he walked in, and I didn't need to look up to know it was him. I could feel the tension in the air as he approached. "Mom," he started, his voice strained with anger. "What's your problem? You really think this is the way to fix things? You've ruined everything. You've always been overdramatic, and now you're just throwing it all away." I stayed seated at the kitchen table, my hands folded in front of me. The calmness I had cultivated in that moment earlier was still there, stronger than ever. I didn't need to raise my voice to make my point anymore. "I'm not throwing anything away, Tyrone. I've been the one holding everything together for years, and you never noticed. I've been quiet, I've kept my head down, and I've let you all walk all over me. But no more. This house, this legacy belongs to me, and I'm not going to let you take it away or belittle me anymore." He stepped closer, his face red with fury. "You think you can just control everything? You think you can just—" I cut him off before he could finish. "I've done everything for this family. I raised you. I raised your siblings. I worked 2 jobs. I sacrificed everything so you could have a better life. But you've never seen that. You've never respected me, and I'm done letting you act like I owe you something." There was a long pause. Tyrone looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a brief moment I saw something like understanding, but just as quickly it was replaced by anger once again. "You're not the boss here, Mum." "You're not?" he spat, his words sharp and cruel. I stood up slowly, my legs steady beneath me. "Maybe not anymore, but I'm not the weak woman you think I am. I'm not going to back down. This is my time now." The silence between us was deafening. He turned away, muttering something under his breath as he stormed out of the room. I could feel the weight of his words lingering in the air, but I wasn't shaken. This was the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. As I stood there, my heart beating in my chest, I knew that I had just started a war, but it was one I was prepared to fight. The days after the barbecue were heavy with tension. The house, which had once been filled with the laughter of my children and the warmth of family, now felt like a battlefield. The smiles were gone. The energy had shifted. I could feel it in every room, in every glance that passed between my children. The respect I had always longed for felt like a distant memory, replaced by uncertainty and discomfort. I stood outside for a moment, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin. The fresh air did little to calm the storm brewing inside of me. I had finally done it, spoken up for myself, put my foot down, but the price was steep. Inside, I knew my family was still processing my announcement. Some of them were angry, some were silent, and others were too afraid to confront me directly. It was clear that the unity we once shared was gone. I was no longer just a mother. I was now the enemy in their eyes, the one who had dared to upset the balance they had grown comfortable with. As I stood there, watching the house from a distance, a flood of emotions rushed over me. Relief, yes, but also loneliness. I had made my stand, but at what cost? I had opened a door that could never be closed again, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. Tyrone, my eldest son, had been the loudest in his response. His voice had been the sharpest, cutting through the silence of the moment like a knife. I knew he would be the hardest to confront, and I was right. His anger continued to simmer, and he made no attempt to hide it. "Mom, you've got to be kidding me," Tyrone muttered under his breath as he paced back and forth in the living room. "You think this is some kind of power move? This is just a damn house." His words stung, cutting deep. His arrogance, his complete disregard for everything I had done for him, for this family, it was like a slap to the face. But I wasn't going to let it hurt me anymore. I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything I had endured. I didn't flinch when he looked my way, his eyes dark with rage. His face flushed as he took another step toward me. "You've always been a control freak, Mom. You've always tried to act like you run the show, but we all know what's really going on here." I could feel the frustration rising inside me, but I kept it under control. I had been silent for so long, letting him and the rest of them walk all over me. But this time, I wouldn't back down. Not for him, not for anyone. "Enough, Tyrone," I said, my voice steady. "You don't get to talk to me like that anymore. I'm not your punching bag." For a moment, there was silence. I could see the shock in his eyes, the disbelief that I had actually said something. He wasn't used to me standing up for myself. He didn't know how to handle it. You think I'm just gonna sit here and let you ruin everything, don't you? He spat. You've got no idea what you're doing. I met his gaze, unwavering. Maybe I do, Tyrone. Maybe I'm finally doing what I should have done years ago. His anger flared again, but I could see something else in his eyes now, fear. Fear that I was no longer the woman he could manipulate. Fear that I had taken back control of my own life. As the evening wore on, things only grew more tense. The family gathered in small groups, some whispering behind my back, others looking at me with judgment in their eyes. I could feel the divide growing wider between us. The very people I had fought for, the ones I had sacrificed everything for, were now questioning my worth. The betrayal stung. It hurt more than I cared to admit. Some of my children stood with Tyrone, swayed by his anger and his manipulation. But others, especially the younger ones, remained quiet. They were unsure of who to side with, torn between loyalty to their brother and the realization that I had always been there for them, even when no one else was. It was a painful sight, watching my own children argue over something that should have been simple: respect. But it was clear that I was no longer the matriarch they had once looked up to. Now I was just a woman fighting for what was rightfully mine. I retreated to my room later that night, needing space to think. The house felt empty, even though it was full of people. I sat on the edge of the bed, my thoughts swirling in a storm of regret and clarity. I had always been the one to keep the peace, to make sure everyone had what they needed. But what had that gotten me? A lifetime of silence, of being taken for granted. I had given my all, and they had taken it without a second thought. But now, I knew I couldn't go back. I had to keep fighting for myself, for my legacy, for the dignity I had let slip away for too long. The next morning, I called the family lawyer. I wasn't going to wait around for Tyrone or anyone else to take control. I was going to fight for what was mine, legally and emotionally. The lawyer's office was cold, sterile. I sat across from him, feeling the weight of what was ahead of me. I want to make sure everything is in order, I told him, my voice firm. I want to protect this house, and I want to protect what I've built here. He nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. It's not going to be easy, he said. There are legal battles ahead, but you are doing the right thing. I nodded back, the cold, hard truth settling in. I had fought for everything I had, and I wasn't about to let it go now. Later that afternoon, I gathered the family again. This time, I wasn't just the angry mother this time. I was a woman who had taken control. I stood tall in front of them, my voice steady as I spoke the words I had been holding back for so long. This house has always been mine, I said, my eyes scanning the room, making sure everyone was listening, and it will remain mine. If you want to be part of this family, you need to learn what respect means. There was a moment of silence before one of my daughters, who had been silent throughout most of this ordeal, spoke up. Her voice was soft but resolute. "Mom, you've always done everything for us. I see that now. I respect you." Her words hit me like a wave of relief. I hadn't expected her to speak up, but I was grateful. It felt like a small victory, but it was something. Tyrone, however, wasn't about to back down. His face reddened with rage as he tried to intimidate me one last time. "You don't scare me, Mom. I'll make sure you regret this. I'll take everything from you." I stood my ground, my eyes never leaving his. "You don't scare me anymore. I've faced worse, and I've come out on top. I'll fight for what's mine, no matter what you do." As I walked away from the confrontation, my heart still pounded in my chest, but I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't the woman I used to be. I was stronger now. And this fight? This was just beginning. The air felt different the morning after the confrontation. The house, once filled with chaos, was now eerily quiet. Tyrone's words, his threats, still echoed in my head. I had taken a step that would forever alter the dynamics of my family, and as much as I had wanted to feel triumphant, all I felt was the weight of what I had set in motion. I sat down on the porch, the same porch I had spent years sitting on, watching my children grow up, watching my life unfold. My eldest daughter, Lila, stepped out quietly and sat beside me. Her presence was a comfort in this mess. She had been the only one to stand with me that day, and her unwavering support gave me the strength I needed to face what came next. "Are you okay, Mum?" Lila asked. Her voice soft but steady. I sighed, looking at the house. "I'm fine, just tired." She nodded, understanding the weight I carried. "It's been a long time coming, hasn't it?" I glanced at her, her face reflecting the worry she had been holding back. "Yes, a long time." The tension of the last 24 hours was still thick in the air, and despite the calm exterior, I could feel the storm brewing inside of me. I had done what needed to be done, but the emotional cost was more than I had anticipated. I had never imagined that my own children would stand divided, torn between loyalty to Tyrone and respect for what I had built. "Do you think they'll come around?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Lila hesitated before answering. "I don't know, Mum, but you've made your point. You've taken control." And she was right. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a grip on the situation. The fear that had once ruled me was fading, replaced by something stronger: confidence. I wasn't going to let Tyrone or anyone else dictate my worth any longer. Just as I was beginning to find some peace, I heard the door slam. Tyrone had arrived. I had been waiting for this moment, knowing he wouldn't let it go, knowing he would fight to keep his hold on everything, including my family's respect. He marched into the room with the same arrogance I had grown so used to over the years. "So, this is how it's going to be, huh? You think you can just claim the house as yours and expect everything to fall into place?" Tyrone's voice was thick with anger, but there was also an undertone of fear that he didn't even realize was there. I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze. "I didn't claim it, Tyrone. It's mine, and you've known that all along," he scoffed. "It's not just a house, Mom. You're tearing this family apart over a piece of property. You don't get to control us like this." His words stung, but they didn't cut as deep as they used to. I had spent years taking his disrespect, his condescension. But this time, I was done. "I'm not tearing the family apart. You are. You've been doing that for years, manipulating everyone to get what you want." "Well, not anymore." Tyrone's jaw clenched, and I could see the flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "You're unbelievable. I've been unbelievable for a long time, Tyrone," I said, my voice firm. "But I won't be your punching bag anymore. Not for you, not for anyone." He tried to pull the strings of the family again, speaking to the others, trying to convince them that I was acting out of selfishness. "She's just doing this for control. She wants everything to be about her. She's always been like this." I could feel the rift growing, a divide splitting my children down the middle. Some of them still rallied behind Tyrone, unsure of the truth, still tied to his manipulations. But I saw others beginning to shift. Slowly, they started to see what I had fought for. They began to understand that I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the one who had held the family together for years. I had sacrificed for them, and I had earned my place. But the growing division wasn't just in my children. It was in me too. I had spent so many years fighting to keep the peace, to keep the family together. But in doing so, I had lost my voice. Now, I had it back, but at what cost? In the silence that followed Tyrone's latest outburst, I stepped away, needing a moment to clear my head. I walked through the house, memories of years gone by flashing before me. The birthday parties, the family dinners, the quiet moments when I had sat alone, wondering if my children would ever truly understand what I had given up for them. Later that afternoon, I met with my lawyer, feeling the weight of the battle ahead. "This is going to get ugly, isn't it?" I asked him, the words heavy with the realization that this fight would not be easy. He nodded grimly. "Tyrone will stop at nothing, but you've got the law on your side." I sat back, thinking about how long I had put this off. I didn't ask for this, but now that it's here, I'll fight for it. The lawyer went over the legal steps and we discussed the options available to me. I wasn't fighting out of spite. I was fighting for my legacy. And I wouldn't let anyone take that from me, not even Tyrone. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I couldn't help but think about my children. They were divided now, and while some stood with me, others, the ones I had loved the most, were still with Tyrone. I felt the sting of that, but I also felt a growing strength. It didn't matter anymore who sided with me or who didn't. This fight was mine, and mine alone. That evening, I called another family meeting. Tyrone would be there. I needed to make my position clear. The stakes were higher now, and I couldn't afford to back down. I've worked too hard to let anyone tear this down, I told them, my voice firm. This is my house, and if you truly want this family to stay together, you learn to respect what I've done for all of you. There was a long silence. The room felt heavy, like the air was thick with judgment and indecision. But then, to my first surprise, my youngest daughter spoke up. Mom, I see what you've done for us, and I respect you for it. I'm with you. Her words were like a balm to my soul. For the first time in this mess, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. But Tyrone's anger flared once again. This isn't over, he spat. I'll make sure you regret this. I looked him straight in the eye. You don't scare me anymore. I've faced worse. The battle had just begun, but I was ready to face whatever came next. The house felt colder than it had in years, even though the sun was shining brightly outside. Tyrone's latest move had torn through our family like a tornado, and it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about control, power, and who would hold the reins of this family. I stood on the porch, watching the distant trees sway in the wind, but inside, my heart felt like it was caught in a storm of its own. I had made a stand, and for once, I didn't regret it. But the pressure of what I had started was heavy on me. Tyrone's threats still lingered in the air. The house, which I had built brick by brick, had become a battleground. I was ready for whatever came next. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into a war zone where my family would never be the same again. I could hear murmurs from inside. The whispers of the family had started to echo louder, the rifts growing deeper. Tyrone had called for a public confrontation, a last-ditch attempt to get the family back on his side. He didn't understand that no matter how much he manipulated, no matter how many lies he spread, I would not bend. The door creaked open, and Lila stepped out to join me. My oldest daughter had been my pillar through all of this. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the same worry I felt. I never imagined it would come to this, she said softly, taking a seat beside me on the porch. I don't think any of us did. I replied, gazing out at the horizon. But here we are. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been spent just making do, just surviving. I had sacrificed so much for my children, for my family, and for this house. I had built a home with my own hands, yet I had always been overlooked, Now that I had finally found the courage to speak up, the family was falling apart. But I had made my choice. I wasn't going to back down. Tyrone, of course, hadn't taken my words lying down. His anger was like a flame, burning everything in its path. The morning after the confrontation, he had started spreading rumors, turning the family against me. "She's lost her mind," he would tell anyone who would listen. This house was never hers to begin with. His voice, sharp and venomous, was aimed at every member of the family who hadn't sided with him yet. But it didn't faze me anymore. I had spent years letting his words chip away at me. No more. The power he once held over me had vanished, and I wasn't about to let him regain it. I spent the afternoon alone, sorting through old boxes in the attic, the silence of the house heavy around me. I pulled out old photographs, memories from a time when life hadn't been so complicated. One photo caught my eye, a picture of me as a young woman, full of hope and promise. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the dreams I had once had, before life and sacrifice had molded me into something else. For the first time in a long time, I thought about that woman, the woman I had buried beneath years of duty, of giving myself away to others. And I realized something important. This fight, this battle, wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming my life. I was fighting for the woman I used to be, the woman I had forgotten. That evening, I met with my lawyer. We discussed the legal steps, the paperwork, the potential battles ahead. I had prepared for this. What I wasn't prepared for was the toll it was taking on me. "Are you sure about this?" the lawyer asked, his voice quiet. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "Tyrone has tested me for the last time." He gave me a nod. "This isn't going to be easy. You know that, right?" "I know," I replied. "But it's not about easy anymore. It's about right." The lawyer looked at me with respect, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it too. This was my fight. This was my legacy, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The next morning, I called a family meeting. I could feel the tension as soon as I stepped into the room. Tyrone was already sitting there, arms crossed, glaring at me. But this time, I didn't flinch. "I've been quiet long enough," I said, my voice steady. "This house, this life is mine, and I will not let anyone tear it down, not even you, Tyrone." For a moment, the room was silent. No one spoke. I could feel the weight of their stares, their judgments. But I stood my ground. Tyrone opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "This isn't just about a house. It's about respect. It's about my life. I've worked too hard for any of you to take that away from me." I could see the anger building in Tyrone's face, but there was something else to fear. Fear that he might lose control, that he might lose everything. You've always been the one in control, haven't you? I said, my voice softer now. But you're not in control anymore. I am. The family looked between us, uncertain. But then something unexpected happened. My youngest son, who had been silent up until this point, spoke up. I've been blind, Mom. I see you now. I stand with you. His words were like a lifeline. Slowly, others began to speak, their voices quiet but resolute, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. But even with their support, Tyrone wasn't finished. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward. You've made a big mistake, Mom. You'll regret this. I stood tall, feeling the strength I hadn't known I had. I won't regret it, Tyrone. Not now, not ever. I had chosen my path, and no matter where it led, I was ready for the fight. This was the breaking point, the moment where I would choose my own destiny. The air inside the house was thick with tension, but somehow I felt calm. The world outside seemed to be crumbling, yet I was steady in the chaos. Tyrone's manipulations had reached a new low, but now I was preparing for the final battle, the fight for my home, my legacy, and my respect. Was no longer just a family matter. It was my stand against everything I had put up with for too long. Standing in the living room, I couldn't help but look around at the walls that had seen so many memories, my children growing up, the laughter, the love, and the pain. This house was mine, built with my hands. It was not just a structure. It was everything I had fought for. And now I would fight for it again. I was tired of letting my past choices and my fear hold me back. Every sacrifice, every quiet moment I'd swallowed had led me to this. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had done the hardest part already, standing up to Tyrone, to the family, to myself. Now I would finish it. Then, just as I was preparing to move forward, the phone rang. It was an unexpected call from an old friend I hadn't heard from in years. Jessie? I heard what's happening. I've got your back. I'll help financially and emotionally, but you've got to know there's always strings attached. Her voice was steady, but there was something about the offer that didn't sit right with me. She was offering a lifeline, but with her help came her conditions. Still, the gesture alone was enough to make me feel less alone in this battle. Thank you, I said, but I wasn't sure if I'd take her up on it just yet. I wasn't ready to compromise everything I had fought for, but that would come later. For now I had to focus on Tyrone's latest attempt to tear down everything I'd built. He was clever, always had been. This time, his tactic was to rally the family behind him, painting me as a woman who'd lost her way. He questioned my motives, my mental state, and even tried to turn my own children against me. His words were venomous, but this time I wasn't shaken. At the family meeting, he played the victim. his voice rising with faux emotion. He accused me of everything: selfishness, deceit, and now, apparently, madness. Look at what she's doing. She's tearing us apart, all over a damn house. He spat, his eyes filled with rage. But no one was buying it. It was hard to hear the things he said about me, the lies he spread. But I had seen this before. The way he tore others down when he feared being exposed. His attempt at manipulation had been the last straw. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. One of my relatives, someone who has stayed on the sidelines for far too long, stepped forward. "I have the proof, Tyrone," they said, their voice steady, as they presented a series of documents that exposed the lies Tyrone had been spreading. It was the final nail in his coffin. Tyrone's manipulation was falling apart, and the family began to turn toward me. It was as if a weight had been lifted. The truth had come to light, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone in this fight. Then came the phone call from my sister. She had been estranged from the family for years, but now she was reaching out. "I'm not going to let you fight this alone," she said. "You've always been there for us, and now it's time for me to be there for you." We hadn't spoken in years, but in that moment it didn't matter. Family, despite the fractures, was still family. The weight of it hit me in that moment, and I felt tears welling up. My sister had always been the one I turned to when things got tough, but I had forgotten that she was still there, still willing to fight by my side. When we met, the floodgates opened. It was a moment of pure, raw vulnerability. The years of silence melted away, and I felt her arms around me as if we were both healing at the same time. Then she dropped a bombshell. "Tyrone's been playing all of us, Jessie. His plan goes deeper than you think. He's been manipulating the whole family for years, getting us to side with him." I couldn't believe it. All these years, I thought I was the one he was after. But it wasn't just me. He'd been manipulating everyone. He'd been slowly chipping away at the foundation of our family for far too long. Now I knew what I had to do. I had to fight for my truth, my dignity, and my family's legacy. I wasn't just protecting a house anymore. I was protecting my right to stand up and be seen. The next morning, I consulted with my lawyer. I laid out the new information, the new evidence that had come to light. We strategized, discussed our next moves. I was no longer just a mother fighting for respect. I was a woman fighting for everything I had built, everything I had worked for. "This is bigger than just a house," I told my lawyer. "It's about proving who I am. It's about showing the world that I'm not just the matriarch. I'm the woman who built this family, who sacrificed for this family, and I will not let it be taken from me." I wrote Tyrone a letter, firm and direct. "You've tried to tear us apart, but I'm done being quiet. This isn't just about property. It's about respect." But it wasn't just about my letter. Tyrone had crossed a line, and my lawyer uncovered something that could completely undo him. A fraudulent action he had taken that could have serious legal consequences. "Let's play it smart," I told my lawyer. "We'll take him down the right way." The court date was fast approaching, and I could feel the tension rising. The family, torn between support for me and support for Tyrone, would be watching. It wasn't just a court case, it was the moment that would define everything I had worked for. When I stood up in that courtroom, my heart was pounding. But I knew one thing: no matter the outcome, I had fought for myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The judge's decision would determine whether my years of sacrifice would be recognized, or if Tyrone's lies would continue to control the narrative. And then, as the court proceedings reached their peak, Tyrone tried to play his last card using his wealth and connections to intimidate the judge, to make himself look like the rightful heir. But the truth, backed by the evidence, started to shine through. His manipulations were exposed for everyone to see. The verdict came down like a hammer. I was awarded full control of the property, but with a catch. I would have to pay Tyrone a portion of the family estate, but the amount he had wanted, much less than he had hoped for. The victory tasted sweet, but there was a bitter aftertaste. Tyrone had lost the battle, but the war was far from over. I had won the house, but the emotional wounds in my family remained. The chapter ended with me standing at the threshold of my home, knowing that the next chapter of my life had just begun. The fight for respect wasn't over, but for the first time, I had taken control. The weight of the battle hung heavily in the air. Tyrone's final attempts to break me down were no surprise. He'd never stop until he had the last word, or until he thought he could take everything I had left. But now, as I prepared for the final showdown, I could feel something different. The years of emotional turmoil and legal battles had led me here, and though the storm wasn't over yet, there was a quiet strength forming deep inside me. It was a resolve I had never known, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Tyrone, take that from me. Sitting in my lawyer's office, staring at the papers in front of me, I couldn't help but reflect on the years of sacrifice. The countless hours spent giving to my children, to my marriage, and to this very home. I'd always put them first, never asking for anything in return, always quiet about my struggles. But now, as I looked at the documents, I realized this wasn't just about a house or a legacy anymore. It was about me. It was about my right to stand up and demand what I had earned. Then the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I picked it up, I heard a familiar voice, an old friend, someone who had been distant for years. "Jessie," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I know what's happening, and I've got your back, financially and emotionally. But you need to understand, There are strings attached. Her words were a lifeline, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept her help yet. It wasn't just the money I was after. It was my dignity, my independence. But the offer felt good. I wouldn't let it cloud my judgment, though. Tyrone's next move was expected. He was desperate now, trying to dig into my past, trying to humiliate me. He threatened to expose embarrassing details of my life to the public, hoping to force me into silence, hoping to make me crumble under the pressure. But it was the same old Tyrone, the same man who always tried to control the narrative. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. At a family dinner, I found myself face to face with him and his supporters. The tension in the room was thick. The looks, the silence, they all said what no one dared to speak. My youngest son, once completely aligned with Tyrone, now seemed unsure. I caught a glimpse of doubt in his eyes, and I knew he was beginning to question his father's motives. As the evening wore on, I noticed one of my children slipping away from the table. A few minutes later, they returned to me, and in a quiet, private moment, they whispered, "I see it now, Mom. I'm on your side. I don't buy into his lies anymore." That was all I needed. The smallest spark of loyalty, and suddenly the weight I'd been carrying for so long seemed a little lighter. Maybe Tyrone hadn't won everyone over. But the real battle wasn't over. The court date loomed. The final confrontation was near, and the family, now divided, was watching closely. I had been preparing in silence. Tyrone thought his wealth and influence would carry him, but I knew how to work quietly. Behind the scenes, I was gathering evidence, lining up witnesses, and fortifying my case. Tyrone had always tried to play the game on his terms, but now it was my turn. The moment came when Tyrone tried once again to attack my credibility in court. But I wasn't about to let him get away with it this time. I stood firm, my voice steady as I presented evidence that shattered his accusations. His once airtight case started to fall apart, and his allies began to shift. One by one, they began to realize the truth. The courtroom felt electric. As the momentum shifted in my favor, I realized something. I wasn't just winning a legal battle, I was reclaiming my life. I wasn't the victim anymore. After weeks of uncertainty, the day of the final verdict arrived. I walked into that courtroom with my head held high, surrounded by my children, some of whom now stood beside me. They had seen the truth. They had heard the story I had carried for so long, and they understood what I had fought for. The judge, after hearing both sides, delivered the ruling. I was awarded full control of the house, but there were conditions. Tyrone would have to pay for his manipulations, though it wasn't the amount he had hoped for. Still, he had lost, and for once the balance had shifted. But the victory was bittersweet. There was still a price to pay. The house was mine, but the damage to the family was far from healed. Tyrone wasn't out of the picture completely, and the wounds that had been opened would take time to mend. The family's fractures remained. Yet as I stood there in the courtroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because the battle was over, but because I had fought for what was mine. I had fought for my dignity. I had fought for myself. As I walked out of that courthouse, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Tyrone, still bitter, would find new ways to try and break me. But I was prepared for whatever came next. The fight for my family's healing, for my own peace, was far from over. But for the first time in years, I felt free. The calm before the storm. The tension in the house was thick, almost suffocating. Tyrone had tried everything he could to take what was rightfully mine. And now, here we were, at the final crossroads. I had been to hell and back, emotionally and legally, but I wasn't about to back down. I had come too far, sacrificed too much, and fought too hard to let it all slip through my fingers. Sitting in the small, quiet room with my lawyer, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. We were finalizing the last details of the case. Everything was in place. The evidence was solid, and Tyrone's lies were beginning to unravel. This was it. This was the fight of my life, and it was time to show up. My mind flashed back to all the years spent holding things together, making sure everyone else had what they needed, and letting my own needs slip away. No more. This battle was mine to win. And I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting for my dignity, my peace. I sat there, staring at the papers in front of me, when my phone buzzed. It was Tyrone. "Mom, I know this is ugly," he said, "but we can settle this. We don't have to go to court. I'll make you an offer. Something fair. Just let me keep control of the house." I wasn't surprised. Tyrone, desperate to hold on to his power, was trying to manipulate me one last time. He knew the game was up. But this wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about him trying to sweep his lies under the rug. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to let him buy his way out. I hung up the phone, feeling a new sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let him dictate the end of this story. The day of the court hearing arrived. The air was thick with tension. I stepped into the courtroom holding my head high. Every eye was on me. My family was there, but it felt like they were standing on opposite sides. Tyrone sat across the room, trying to maintain control, trying to look calm, as if the last few years hadn't been spent manipulating and undermining everything I'd built. But I saw through it all. Fear still clung to me. But it wasn't the same fear I'd had in the past. It wasn't the fear of losing the house. It was the fear of losing my voice. And I wasn't about to let that happen. I had earned the right to be heard. When the time came for me to speak, I stood up. I could feel the eyes on me. Some of my family members watching with skepticism, some with hope. I opened my mouth and let my words spill out. I've been quiet for too long, but not anymore. I've given everything for this family, and I will not let anyone take what's mine. Not you, Tyrone, and not anyone else. The room fell silent. The strength in my voice surprised even me. And then something happened. One of Tyrone's own allies, someone who had stood by him through all of this, stood up and testified on my behalf. They exposed Tyrone's lies. They shared the truth, and it was like a bomb went off in the room. Terrence's facade started to crumble right there, in front of everyone. But the fight wasn't over. As I sat back down, I could feel the weight of everything pressing in on me, the years of sacrifice, the countless betrayals, the love I had poured into my family that had been taken for granted. I tried to push the emotions aside. I wasn't here to cry. I was here to win. And then the lawyer brought something else to light a letter from Tyrone's late father, which he thought had been lost. The letter exposed a family secret, one that tied directly to the ownership of the house. The letter revealed something I hadn't known before, that the house was always meant to be mine. Tyrone's attempts to claim it were illegal from the start. I could see the shock in Tyrone's eyes. He was rattled now, desperate to maintain his grip on what he had fought so hard to steal. But I wasn't going to let him control the narrative anymore. As the hearing wore on, Tyrone's anger began to surface. He lost his cool, throwing accusations left and right, trying to undermine me in front of the judge. But I stood tall, unmoved by his theatrics. I had come too far to let him drag me back into the pit. And then, in a last-ditch attempt, he made his move. You know, I could make sure everyone knows about your past, Jessie. What you've done, what you've hidden, it'll destroy you. I didn't flinch. I didn't flinch because I knew the truth. I had nothing to hide. In that moment, I turned it on him. I stood up again and said, if you think you can use my past against me, think again. You don't get to own my story. Not anymore. I knew my words had hit their mark. Tyrone was finished. The judge called a recess before delivering the verdict. I sat there, hands trembling, but my heart steady. I had done everything I could. The rest was out of my hands. And then, the moment of truth. The judge returned to the room, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. My heart pounded in my chest. The judge looked at us all and then spoke. Miss Jessie, after reviewing all the evidence, I'm awarding you full ownership of the family home. However, Tyrone will be required to pay reparations for his actions. I didn't let myself smile, not yet. The conditions were tough, but it was a win, a victory, not perfect, but mine. As I walked out of the courtroom, a sense of relief washed over me. Tyrone's manipulations had finally been exposed, but the battle wasn't over. Not for me, not for my family. There was still work to do, healing to be had. I walked into my home, the one I had built with my own 2 hands, the walls that had seen my tears, my struggles, and my triumphs. I stood there, letting it sink in. This was mine. I was no longer just surviving. I was living. But as I thought about the future, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done. Tyra might have lost the battle, but the war for my family's peace was still ongoing. I'd fight with everything I had. I was ready. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the final verdict. I could feel my heart beat in my chest, and I held my breath, knowing this moment would change everything. After all these years of fighting, of standing up against my own flesh and blood, this was the moment that would define everything I had fought for. My entire life led to this point, and the weight of it all pressed down on me. The judge cleared his throat, and the room seemed to hold its breath as well. He looked over the papers before him, then turned to face us. In the matter of the estate of Miss Jessie, I have reviewed all evidence thoroughly. I hereby declare that Miss Jessie is the rightful owner of the family home. Furthermore, Tyrone will be required to pay reparations for his actions. A wave of disbelief spread through the courtroom. My heart swelled with triumph, yet my hands shook. The victory was mine, but it was not without its complications. Tyrone, who had tried so hard to steal this home from me, stormed out, refusing to accept the ruling. "This isn't over," he shouted, vowing to appeal. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the words. The house was mine, but Tyrone's anger, his refusal to accept the truth, made the victory feel incomplete. I wanted to savor this moment, but the shadow of his defiance lingered. In the aftermath of the verdict, the reactions from my family were mixed. Some of them, the ones who had remained by my side, expressed relief. Others, still loyal to Tyrone, couldn't hide their disapproval. I felt the walls closing in around me as I watched them struggle to reconcile the truth with their loyalty to him. The conversation turned into quiet whispers behind my back, but I was done being a passive participant in my family's drama. I stood firm, looking each of them in the eye, and I said, "The future of this family depends on honesty and respect. If we can't give each other that, then we'll never heal. We have to start with the truth." Just when I thought my resolve was being tested beyond its limits, an unexpected voice broke the silence. My niece, who had always stayed in the background, stepped forward. Her eyes were filled with regret, but also a fierce sense of determination. "I was wrong to stay quiet, Aunt Jessie. I've seen everything now. I'm with you, no matter what." The room seemed to hold its breath, and I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, But it was enough to remind me that even though Tyrone had done everything he could to tear us apart, there were still those in the family who valued the truth. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I returned to my home, the house that had been at the center of so much pain and heartache. But now it was mine. The victory, however, was bittersweet. I'd won the house, but the emotional toll of the battle had left scars that would take time to heal. I found myself standing in the kitchen late one night, alone. The silence was deafening, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had fought so hard to keep this place, to prove my worth, and I'd done it. But I also knew that the real work was just beginning. The house was mine, but my family? It would take time to rebuild those connections. It wasn't long before Tyrone made his final move. He couldn't accept defeat, and in his desperation, he tried to sway public opinion. He spread rumors, and in one last attempt, he tried to bribe people to testify against me. At first, I was angry, but then I realized something. Tyrone was running scared. His world was crumbling, and he couldn't stand it. I wasn't going to let him tear me down again. I met with my lawyer, who advised me on how to handle his latest antics. This time, however, I wasn't just defending my property, I was protecting my peace. Tyrone's underhanded tactics wouldn't work anymore, and as expected, one of his own allies, someone who had been manipulated by him for years, came forward to expose his lies. That was the turning point. The moment his last desperate attempts to destroy me began to unravel, I focused on healing after that. The legal battle was finally behind me, but the emotional scars ran deep. I attended a community event where I shared my story for the first time, and it felt cathartic. There were others there who had been through similar struggles, and we all shared our stories of survival and strength. It was empowering, not just for me, but for everyone in that room. In the months that followed, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to heal for myself. I was going to use my story to help others who were trapped in toxic situations. This was my new mission, to empower and support those who needed it. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about giving others the strength to stand up for themselves the way I had stood up for mine. One day, a few months after the trial, I found myself in my front yard, watching the sunset. I thought about everything that had happened and the years of struggle that had brought me here. The house was mine, yes, but the real victory was in the peace I had found. I had come full circle. The woman who had once been afraid to speak up, who had quietly sacrificed for everyone around her, was now the woman who stood tall, unapologetic, and proud of her journey. And as I stood there, watching the last rays of sunlight fade into the horizon, I realized that this was just the beginning. I was ready for whatever came next. I had fought my battles, and I had won. But my journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.